Let's get started. Thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Sonia Kiner, and I'm on the network management team, Local Concepts LLC, that provides support to the Chesapeake Foodshed network. I'm joined by network manager and Local Concepts owner, Christy Gabbard, and our panelists, whom I will introduce in a moment. We're also joined by some portion of over 100 registrants from all across the US and the globe. We know there's a tremendous amount of experience here and expertise, and we're so pleased to be able to share in this learning and dialogue with you today. First, I'm just going to give a quick overview of the CFN. The CFN is made up of individuals and organizations across the Chesapeake Foodshed who share a vision of building a sustainable, resilient, inclusive, and equitable regional food system that supports healthy communities, land, and waterways. Our mission is to catalyze the connections and collaborations necessary across the region to work towards that vision. We believe that by working together, we're better positioned to advance the pace of change. We're led by a steering team of 20 people and support 2 working groups in addition to a pilot community ownership, empowerment, and prosperity action team. Our steering team is committed to advancing equity in the food system and working to operationalize values related to equity and justice. To learn more about and to join the network, please visit our website, chesapeakefoodshed.net. I'm so excited to hear from our presenters today. Each presentation will last about 20 minutes, so there'll be plenty of time for questions. Please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen that appears when you hover over it. Christy will be monitoring the chat box where we'll be posting relevant links, and please feel free to introduce yourself there and to use the Q&A box for all questions. We'd love for any of our communications mavens out there to live tweet if you feel so compelled with the Twitter handles at the bottom of the screen here. If you hear something you find inspiring or challenging, please share it with our online communities. It's an honor to introduce our dynamic panelists today. Noelle Harden has worked on food systems change in Minnesota for the last 6 years as an educator with University of Minnesota Extension. Across all of her work, she seeks to disrupt systems that perpetuate inequity. To that end, Noelle has championed the implementation of participatory grantmaking as a strategy to build transformative relationships and disrupt the centralization of money and power that precludes systemic change in many contexts, including food and ag. Noelle's educational background is in geography, agroecology, and sustainable food production. She has also farmed, started a mobile chicken processing business, and is currently co-chair of her community's Food Policy Council. Welcome, Noelle. Thank you. Jamie Bain is a natural connector and collaborator working on food justice through networks at the University of Minnesota Extension as well. She believes that through authenticity, imagination, playfulness, and deep connectivity, we can find the solution to life's wicked problems together. She recognizes her inherent power as a cisgendered, heterosexual white female working for a large academic institution and living on land taken from the Dakota people in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Jamie uses her power to push for restorative justice within white-dominant circles she has the privilege of being invited to. She also listens and feels for common ground with communities and organizations who want to co-create a food system that is meant to nourish everybody. She has an undergraduate degree in nutrition, a master's degree in public health, and is a lifelong learner in the areas of joy and love. Finally, Bart Westdijk will be giving the second presentation. He comes to us from the New England Grassroots Environment Fund. And he's from the Netherlands. He now lives on the shore of Lake Champlain in Burlington, Vermont, and serves as Director of Operations, focusing on a variety of tasks, including strategic program development, fundraising, Grow Grant program review, local food-related research, and network participation. His main focus has been on the participatory process, ensuring protocols and practices throughout the organization center equity. Bart served as board president for the Vermont Community Garden Network from 2007 to 2012 and is currently involved with the startup collaborative Brewpub and is engaging in conversations to launch perma-blitzes with a particular focus on class, privilege, equity, and equity around Chittenden County, Vermont. Thank you all for being with us today and your work in this space. Noelle and Jamie.
All right. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I'll look for a thumbs up from Sonia. Awesome. Thank you so much to the Chesapeake Foodshed Network for inviting us to be a part of this today. Jamie and I are just super excited to be here. I'll just take a moment to get our slides pulled up. Hopefully you can see those. We are, as I said, super excited to be here to talk about something that we are extremely passionate about, and grateful to be able to present to some of the folks that we've learned from over the years as we've been working on food systems. So we'll start off with a slide that captures some of the values and some of the words that we use to think about all of our work with the University of Minnesota Extension. So I'll give you all just a few seconds to look at those words on the screen, maybe think about some of the ones that might describe your own work, and then hand it to Jamie to say a bit more about this.
Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me too. I was just saying I have a really old computer. Okay, cool. Yeah, so these are the sort of words that influence our philosophy, and what we wanted to make sure to start with here is that you don't have to be a grant maker to be influenced by this participatory grant making process. It's really for us just a philosophy that has influenced all aspects of our work in the food system. But we are also going to talk about specific activities that we do related to participatory grant making. So as you're sort of listening to the examples, make sure to sort of pay attention to these words as they pop out through the examples, and try to think about how they can fit into the work that you do, whether it's through grant making or really anything else that you do that's collaborative and community minded. And just so you know, Noelle and I work super closely together, so this is going to be just like very conversational between the two of us, and we encourage you to ask questions, and we're fine being interrupted. So we're hoping to have this just be like a really authentic conversation with all of you. So the first question that we want to ask you guys is, why are you here today? If you could just put in your chat box the answer to this question for you. I think it's going to be a little different for everyone, and we just kind of want to get a feel for what brings you here and why this is interesting to you. I'm hoping everyone's fingers are just very busy typing. Right, so Jenny says, we're exploring the shared gifting model for distribution of microgrants to food councils across North Carolina. All right. And Martha says, we're supporting a regional food business development program. Andrew says, I'm here to see how we can encourage more peer-to-peer relationships through the mini grant we offer. All right. So you guys should be able to see the chat function on the right side of your screen. If you can't, you can put your mouse down towards the bottom of your screen, and a box with a bunch of different icons should show up, and you should see one that says chat, and that way you can see what everyone's typing in. So it looks like people are coming to this from a variety of lenses, but it looks like there's a lot of grant makers in the audience, and some people who are just looking to deepen their democratic principles in the work that they're doing. All right, so let's go to the next slide. For this next slide, we're gonna ask you guys to unmute when you're willing to share with us.
Oh, and Jamie, sorry. I just love some of these comments that are coming through.
Yeah, get it in.
Look, and I think we were actually going to do our first poll question, which is really great because clearly a lot of you already have expertise in this. Some are exploring it for the first time. So our first poll question will get at that. So it's asking, how ready are you to incorporate participatory grant making into your work right now? And you can see those options, and we'll take just a few seconds for you guys to answer those.
And if there are any fellow public health nerds out there, if you can put in the chat function what theory we're pulling from for this question, you get double points.
There are your final results up on the screen.
All right. It looks like we have a lot of people in the pre-contemplation phase, which is great. This means that you're putting your feelers out there and getting ready to move into that contemplation phase, maybe by the end of this presentation. All right. So this is a slide that we like to use to kind of get the juices flowing about participatory grant making. And we're going to ask that you unmute yourself when you talk. And we just want to know, like, what words come to mind when you see this picture that we've created through obviously like really fantastic graphic design to show what traditional grant making looks like. You can, if you don't feel comfortable unmuting yourself, you can also put it into the chat box. Concentration of power, winners and losers. The people funded are more closely linked to the grant funders. There are people being left out. There's a lack of transparency. It's cutthroat. There are few people making decisions that impact a lot of other people. And if you can't see how to unmute, if you scroll down to the bottom of your page, there will be a bunch of icons and you can go to the far left. There'll be a mute, unmute button, but I think this chat function is working just fine. Confusion and frustration with those who didn't receive the grant or didn't even know about the grant. Business as usual, a narrow focus. All right, I think you guys get the gist of what traditional grant making looks like, right? There are a few of the decision makers that are happy, but there's always that one person that really didn't get what they wanted, and they're left feeling disenfranchised. And then the people who get the money feel great that they got the money, and then some of the other people that didn't get the money are like, wait, why didn't I get this money? Like, how was theirs more competitive than mine? What do I need to do differently? How can I get into this competitive process without feeling left out? And I like this last comment too, that it's not systems oriented, it's project oriented. Okay, so then we're gonna go to the next slide and do the same thing. I want you guys to tell us what you see here. So this is our beautifully designed slide for participatory grant making. It's a happy mess. Lots of communication. Collaboration, more winners in the community. Everyone has the power to share wealth. Everyone benefits. Everyone has input. The word everyone is a common theme here. And that's a word that we like to see in our work. The decision makers have a view of the whole field of participation, centering the most marginalized populations. Multi-directional connections, more equity. Yeah, I think you guys nailed it. This is showing that it's a mess, right? And anyone who does equity-based work, it's messy. And it can be hard to explain it to people because it's messy. And so we're gonna do our best to sort of explain what participatory grant making looks like for us. And to try to do it in the simplest way possible, I just want you to know that we're not going to get into the sort of nuts and bolts of how we've designed some of the activities that we've done. And if you have questions about that sort of like really detailed stuff, we'll have our emails at the end, and feel free to reach out to us for that. But for this presentation, we really want to give you, especially since so many people are in this pre-contemplation phase, an overview of what it looks like to do participatory grant making, even if you only have $10,000 or $5,000 to do it. We have a bunch of examples that we've used that have been really fun and creative, and they've made a big impact. All right. Well, I'm going to let you take over. And I'm going to stay unmuted since my audio is not doing the greatest.
All right. So thanks everyone for all your engagement so far. I love seeing those great answers come through the chat. So as Jamie mentioned, neither of us are philanthropy experts or necessarily funders. We are extension educators who've been lucky to have the opportunity, mostly through internal funds from our own organization, Extension. We've been able to experiment with participatory grant making or decision making processes related to funding about 5 or 6 times. So we'll give a really quick overview of some of the things that we've tried, which include collaborative decision making, online voting, shared gifting circles, and both external grants and allocating internal program budgets using these methods. And our first example is a simple one where we had a larger grant, but a portion of that grant, about $5,000 to $10,000, set aside for local county level on the ground nutrition educators to come together in a meeting and do some collaborative brainstorming around what are different ways they could leverage these funds in order to work together to enhance individual projects that they were already working on in each county. So after this brainstorming process that I facilitated, the staff voted on 2 different kind of regional scale projects that they could work on collectively. And one of these projects has been a tremendous success for our region, where we've had about 20 different communities implementing this program with regional support. And they've continued this so far an additional 2 years beyond the initial injection of grant funds. So this is a cool way to, without actually going through something as intensive as a shared gifting circle that we'll talk about, to use some of those democratic principles that you guys have alluded to already. And I'll hand it back to Jamie to go through our next example.
I think Lex has an important question, though. I think it says, were the end users of that program involved in this collaborative decision-making process? And for that grant, they weren't, but we've done, we're currently doing another grant that they are more integrated. Something that's super important about this collaborative grant making process is that it's about the process almost more so than it is about the impact that's being made. So for that case, the goal of it was, yes, to create a project, but really the foundational goal of it was to bring these educators together to be thinking about what they can do together collaboratively to sort of enhance our internal team approach. So it made the most sense to have it be more of an internally faced collaborative process. Another thing that, another way that we've done this collaborative grant making is that Noelle and I, the reason that we work together is that we love collaboration. So we both work in food networks, food policy councils, and food coalitions. And we have had the honor of working with all of the 50-some food collaboratives across the state. And in 2016, we brought them all together for a statewide conference. And Extension gave us basically $10,000 to play around with, and we knew we wanted it to be participatory. And we also knew we didn't have a ton of time at this conference because we had so much other good stuff that we wanted to do. So we didn't want to do the full in-depth shared gifting process. So it only took us about 90 minutes at the end to design this collaboratively with the 70+ people in the room. So what we did is, you can go to the next slide, is that we, everything we do, we want it to be really interactive and fun and playful. So we have people moving around the rooms, and we had sticky paper up that's like, what would you do with $500? What would you do with $1,000? What would you do with $2,000? And everyone was like kind of getting their creative juices flowing through this exercise. And then we had people vote on how we should distribute the funds? Should we do it as one big $10,000 grant? Should we do it as two $5,000 grants? Or should it be a combination of, you know, like 500, 200, or 500, 2,000, whatever. And ultimately they decided on the most complicated one, which was a combination of small grants and bigger grants. And then we use this simply voting system that you can see on this slide. And we had people submit within like a month after the conference, submit a small 250-word proposal about what they would do with whatever option grant they wanted to go with, 500, 2,000, or 5,000. And then we had participants of the conference vote on which proposals within each category of funding they thought would be most impactful. And then those people who rose to the top, those networks that rose to the top received that funding. Noelle, did you want to add anything about that?
I don't think so. I think that was a great summary. And of course, if you guys have questions, just put those in the chat, or we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of both of our presentations. So our next example is of shared gifting circles. And this is probably, well, this was the example that first inspired us. I'm not sure if he's on the call, but Ken Morse from the Maine Network of Community Food Councils had actually turned us on to this technique and described how powerful it could be to accelerate the kind of learning that happens between people as they're sharing their project ideas and then actually being tasked with making decisions about those. So this was invented by Rudolf Steiner, who some of you food system nerds might know. He's also the inventor of biodynamic farming. But it was invented about 30 years ago and started with a group of Waldorf schools. And it's gained a lot of momentum through the work of these guys, RSF Social Finance. Ellie might be on the call. I saw that she is registered. Ellie is one of the two in this picture here. So these are the international gurus of shared gifting. And we've been lucky to work with these two. First of all, when we got connected with them, they invited me to attend what you'll see some photos of, which was a shared gifting circle with the original Waldorf schools that invented it in Milwaukee. So they've been really good allies in this process, and I encourage you, if you're interested in doing a shared gifting circle, to reach out to them. And I think Christy was gonna put their website into the chat box if she hasn't already. But I love the values that they highlight of cultivating gratitude, building trust, and encouraging radical collaboration. I think from what I've learned so far, a lot of us on the call could relate to those values. So the way a shared gifting circle works, like any good facilitation, it starts with preparing people for the experience. And this happens before the shared gifting circle, where you have individual conversations with everyone involved to prepare them for this process. And also having people share very brief proposals ahead of time that everybody who's participating in the circle can review. And who participates in the circle? That would be people seeking funding. RSF typically does this with different groups of nonprofit organizations working on some kind of similar issue, often food systems, in a defined area. In this example, we did it with teams of our extension colleagues working on food systems who each were instructed to pair up with a community partner to develop their project. So setting the stage also happens the day of the shared gifting circle through different activities that you facilitate to get people connected and to be relating to one another in a way that doesn't center around work or their projects. We also have grounded people in the experience by helping them think about certain lenses to apply to their decision making. It's important to say we don't require people to use any kind of decision making rubric. But we do do a little bit to encourage them to use a lens related to systems. In our case, we work a lot on food systems using the Minnesota Food Charter as kind of a roadmap. And so we've done an activity related to that where people kind of map out where in the system their project fits and talk about connections to other parts of the system. We also use this graphic and have gone through a process of deconstructing this graphic that I'm sure many of you have seen comparing equality and equity. And this is really important in shared gifting. And I'll get to that in a couple minutes. So then people, along with the written proposal, which is usually 1 or 2 paragraphs, they'll have an opportunity during the circle to give a really quick and focused pitch about their project, and then a few minutes to entertain questions and get ideas from the group. Then we have this often very uncomfortable moment where people, it kind of dawns on them, despite all of our work to prep them, when they realize that they actually have to make the decision about allocating funds. That's often a tense moment for people. And so how this works is we'll have a pot of money. Let's say it's $30,000 and we have 10 participants. So it gets split 10 different ways, so $3,000 each. They always get to keep a portion of that, which might be like $500. And then the rest of their $3,000, they grant out to all the other projects. So they get some time to think through those decisions on their own. Then we do the gifting process. And you know, sometimes people want to default to, well, I'm just going to split this 10 different ways. And there might be some group conversation around that. But that's when we often come back to, well, what's the difference between equality and equity? Not everyone has asked for the same amount of money. Not everyone has the same needs. So sometimes we'll have a conversation about some of those issues. And then after people have made their decisions and they have a worksheet to fill out to help with the math, we go around the circle and everybody announces their decisions transparently, often giving a reason why they've made the decision that they've made. So then there's a break and everybody's totals after that initial gifting are added up. And then people get a little bit of time to reflect and think about, okay, this is what I've been awarded. What do I actually need? What have other people been awarded in comparison to what they need? And then there's a second round where people look at their own project total and they can make a decision to just leave it how it is, or they can take some from their own total and kind of re-gift it to other folks in the circle. So those are, I know that was really quick, but those are 3 examples of how we've done this. And I'll hand it back to Jamie to do some reflection on those processes.
Noelle, quick clarifying question from Christine. Yes. Do the participants ask for a certain dollar amount in the project pitch?
Yes, we will have them identify an amount. We like to have them do that when they're sending out their written proposals, and we'll always give them some idea, you know, what's the total amount that we'll be gifting, how many people are participating, so that they know what the average award roughly will be. And then we've also had people make adjustments to their requested amount during the pitch process as they're getting feedback from other participants. So yes, we do ask for that, but we can be kind of flexible about how that's done.
And this is, even just like listening to it from someone who's done it several times, it's like complicated to try to understand it when someone just says it to you, but we've done simulations of it to help people understand it, and we can do it in like 90 minutes when we're like really just trying to help people understand the process of it. So I encourage you, if you're interested in this, to like get your colleagues together or to have some sort of group do a simulation of it. And if you want help with that, you know, there's a ton of resources online, or me and Noelle, and we're happy to help you too. So I highly encourage a simulation so you can really understand how powerful this process is. We wanted to highlight just some of the keys to success that we've found in the multiple different approaches that we've taken to participatory grant making. I feel like we had a leg up a little bit because we have focused on a networked approach for the last 5-7 years. And it's really similar to the philosophies of a networked approach. So we're not doing anything in our work already that's very linear and sort of project-based. Everything we're doing is very messy and flexible. So we just want to encourage people to be sort of flexible throughout the entire process of participatory grant making, from the design to the implementation to the follow-through. We also want to encourage people to start being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and having there be that sort of unknown, and just sort of trusting that if you're using the philosophies of, you know, democracy and decentralization, trust, authenticity, conversations, that a collaborative solution to any issue you have already exists. You just need to tap into it. We also want to encourage people to give participants and others involved in this the time to reflect, because this can be a really powerful experience for people, and it's really sort of out of the norm of traditional funding. And so you really want to give people that time to sort of understand what the process actually meant, because like I said, oftentimes the outcomes of the funding that they get is almost less important than the process that they've gone through. And the process that they've gone to can really influence all of the work that they're doing. And then finally, as sort of implementers of this process, to make sure that you're focusing on the people and the ideas rather than the outcomes. There's a reason that we have authenticity as a primary part of our philosophy. We try to just really help to make connections that are really deep and authentic, where you know, people can be working together to help influence their work and make a greater impact together. And like I said, it's not even necessarily the outcome of their projects, it's the connections and the learnings that happen through the process that really are the major influencers here.
A couple more clarifying questions. Folks really want to know about time. I heard you say 90 minutes, but folks really want to understand a little bit more about timing and how many people, you know, considering the timing, and how many groups should be involved, like how many is too many?
Yeah, so 90 minutes was for the simulation. It takes much longer than that to do it in real life. Noelle, I'll let you answer.
Sure. So ideally with RSF, they make it more than a day. We've done it, one of our shared gifting circles that was in person, we had one day, it was like a 9 to 3 or 9 to 4. And I think that was really a good amount of time to spend a couple hours doing some opening activities, doing the stage setting around equity and systems thinking, to take a nice, you know, hour for lunch, time to walk outside. We believe all of that kind of stuff is really important. We've also done I think it took about 3 hours, an internal shared gifting circle that was done online through Zoom. But this was kind of a special situation where this was our health and nutrition program team across the state. We all know each other. We didn't need to do a lot of stage setting because we'd done that in previous calls together. So we could really dig in to going through the process. And we did that all online through Zoom. And that approach is how we're planning to do our next gifting circle with community members. And as far as the amount of people, I think about 8 to 12 different projects seems like kind of a sweet spot where there's good opportunity for cross-pollination and enough time for everyone to be thoroughly engaged. And RSF Social Finance could give many more examples of things that have worked and times when it hasn't worked so well. So thanks for the great question. All right, so some of you, especially the funders, might be wondering, what about reporting and documentation? So first, before I dig into how we've done that, it's really important to think back to, what are the philosophical underpinnings of this approach? And so we have another chat poll, or another poll, which you can pull up now for everyone. But basically, we learned from folks that we've worked with that there's kind of three ways of thinking about financial transactions. So I want you guys to think which approach is usually taken in traditional grant-making efforts. Is it a loan, a purchase, or a gift? We'll take just a few seconds for you to think about that. All right. Oh, so this is really interesting. So most of you think that traditional grant making, 70% of you put that into the gift category. And we actually would disagree about that. We would say that most traditional grant making efforts actually take more of the purchase approach. And we would say that because there are often a lot of expectations, deliverables, reporting, other aspects of traditional grant making that make it more of a transactional kind of relationship. But I think it's wonderful that 70% of you are maybe thinking that these should be approached more in the gift mentality. So we've approached it in that way where we allow a lot of flexibility for people to change projects and where we don't have a lot of expectations as far as reporting and deliverables. We do know that those things are important to capture, but we've often gone to the grantees themselves to ask, what are the different ways that you want to report your successes? And when we have had greater needs to report back to funders, we try to do it through fun get-togethers. So in the picture, this is one of the celebration gatherings / qualitative evaluation gatherings where we brought people together a year later to talk about how their projects went. And we did a lot of fun activities. This picture involves a maypole since we were gathering on May Day. So I know that we are needing to wrap up, but I encourage you to think of questions that you have for the Q&A. This is a really great quote from when we actually did a simulated gifting circle, which shows the power of this approach, even when there isn't actual money at stake. So this person, talks about how the proposals were brilliant. The process is amazing. They have ideas on how extension could do more of this in an upcoming opportunity. And my favorite part about the quote is that they emphasize that people are given space to innovate together, especially across our different program areas, and how powerful that is. So this is our last slide with content. Our latest grant making effort, actually it's great timing because the due date for this is today. But this is the Action Learning Seed Fund. We'll be allocating these funds in a shared gifting circle. We'll likely also have to do an online vote to narrow down who's going to participate in the circle. So we're happy to connect with folks if you have questions as that unfolds. And I think hopefully Christy or Sonia have posted the link for this. But but I'd really like you to check out this invitation to apply for this opportunity. First of all, it's not an RFP. Second of all, we're really trying to reach people who maybe aren't as familiar with grant making and don't have as much experience. And third of all, we've actually promoted this through a poem to encourage people to really be creative in their proposals. So all of those things you can find through this website, and I really encourage you guys to take a look. So thank you so much for listening and engaging with us. I really love the different ideas that you've shared with us, and we've learned some from that already. So thank you. Jamie and I really encourage you to get a hold of us. Our emails are both on the screen. And lastly, I will give Jamie the opportunity to share any final thoughts.
My final thoughts are covered by you. I just want to thank everyone. And like Noelle said, we learned from you and your comments. And this is all sort of creative and playful for us. We're just exploring this because we really love the values that come with it. So we're excited to be learning alongside you, and look forward to hearing Bart's presentation as well.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Very cool work you're doing, very creative. And it feels very joyful too for everybody. Bart, are you ready? If you guys, Noelle, you can stop your, there we go, great.
Awesome, yes. Let's get set up here. And can you see my scene, Sonia?
Yep.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Sonia, and thanks, Noelle and Jamie. That was really great. It's great to kind of get the context and see those specific examples. And I'll pick up where Jamie and Noelle left off in saying that I represent the Grassroots Fund. And this presentation is really one of the first times we're digging into our model more. Very much welcome all your questions, your comments, your feedback as we start exploring how we share our story and our experience a little bit more out there with people to participate and co-create. So I'm going to give a little bit of quick feedback on the organization first, and then we'll dig in to some specific examples and reasons why we started doing this participatory approach more. So the Grassroots Fund has been around since 1996, and our niche is to really focus on those community groups, those neighborhood efforts that are often unincorporated, so they don't have a formal 501c3, often don't have a fiscal sponsor, but they're groups of neighbors that are getting together and are seeing an opportunity or a challenge in their community and want to do something about it. And there's a barrier to get funding for them because traditional philanthropy, traditional foundations often require budgets, they require strategic plans, they require that 501c3 status in order to receive funding. In 1996, a group of those foundations got together and realized there's a tremendous amount of innovation happening at that local level. When groups aren't formal, because they lack that strategic plan, they're able to try things out, flip and reverse if something doesn't work, and really meet where their community is at. But it was hard to get those resources to those groups. So that's really where we came in, and the organization has been funding those local unincorporated efforts for over 20 years. We've reached over 60% of communities and towns in New England. The 6 New England states of Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Connecticut. At this point, we really are defining our core programs as fostering innovation through the grants, so really allowing groups to stay unincorporated, to still really try and take advantage of that flexibility. We are convening change makers. So in addition to giving grants, we're also bringing people together for workshops to focus on specific skills. We're finding that there are a tremendous amount of workshops geared towards nonprofits that are assuming there's paid staff, but not a lot of resources for these volunteer-led efforts. So we have what we call our Root Skills training series, which is both online through webinars, acknowledging that a lot of people have paid jobs and can't necessarily travel, and a few face-to-face convenings and conferences that we do over the weekend, where we really try hard to lower barriers as much as possible. The Amplifying Voices part is really focused on this participatory piece. How do we bring in especially marginalized voices that haven't found a way to be heard, to be acknowledged in traditional systems, How do we do a better job of amplifying those voices? And then last, how do we revolutionize philanthropy? Which is really where this presentation comes in, and we're starting to explore more and more how we can do that and how we can disrupt some of the processes that are dominant right now. In terms of the connection to food, given that this is the Chesapeake Foodshed network, organizing food is really one of our biggest issue areas. Close to 40% of our funding, we give about $500,000 to $600,000 a year in 3 different grant programs, which kind of follows the Tuckman group stages of development. We have a seed grant program, which is up to $1,000 with a quick turnaround. It takes about 4 weeks from applying to receiving funding, which is really geared towards those groups that are just getting started. They've just formed, they're very energetic. They need some funding to get a tool shed, get compost, get seeds, and we want to meet them as quickly as possible. Which is actually an interesting tension and dynamic within participatory decision making. How do we have a rapid response fund and still really honor participation? Our GROW grants are up to $3,500. We have 2 deadlines for those. The seed grants are rolling. Our GROW program has specific deadlines. That's where we experimented with participatory decision making the most and are really testing our own protocols. And then our Young Adult Leaders program is a pilot this year. We're formalizing that going into next year, which is really geared towards groups that are giving meaningful leadership roles to young adults, which we define as up to 25 years old. Of all those different grant programs, about 40% of funds go to food-focused community efforts. And we're really seeing food as a true community builder. It's bringing people together. Everybody eats. It's really an inroads to also find environmental justice and food justice work where social justice issues are intersecting with some of the more traditional environmental themes. And lastly, I'll say I'm a member of the Food Solutions New England effort. I'm on the network planning team, and we're really exploring how our model with the Grassroots Fund can really serve to help the values of Food Solutions New England be operationalized. How do we have that as a tool to engage people in conversations around equity in the food system? And that's really where our participatory journey started. In 2016, we had a new executive director come on, and we kind of revisited our founding documents. We had an analysis of our network and found that we were funding predominantly white-led local groups, relatively privileged, that had the time and the resources to actively engage, and also had the experience and the confidence to approach us as a funder. And we really kind of sat with that for a while. And when we looked at our founding documents, that wasn't necessarily the goal of the organization. We wanted to really reach out to some of the marginalized voices there that have a really hard time getting to some of the resources. So we kind of took a step back and talked about, well, how can we put equity at the center, and realized at that point we didn't have a set of guiding values that were clearly publicized. We weren't really integrating equity questions into our application. And we were working with a grant-making committee at the time, but that committee was invited by staff. It was dependent on our networks. We really needed to disrupt some of these pieces and really start looking at what are the barriers for more voices to participate? What are the barriers that we are creating internally that we can address to really get to that equity at the center piece? And for us, equity, the definition here is really dignity and well-being for everyone, and ensuring that resources and power are shared in ways for all people to realize our full potential and contribute to thriving, sustainable communities. And I see some of those themes show up in CFN's vision and values as well. So it's great to see that overlap. I want to dovetail a little bit on what Jamie and Noelle already shared as well, that this process of participatory decision-making is not sort of a one-off. It's something that permeates through our entire organization. I'll focus mostly on our grant-making program here, but the way we are organizing events, the way we are organizing workshops, our conference, which is coming up in December in Worcester, Massachusetts, all of these now have planning committees where we no longer want to make decisions internally ourselves. We really want to rely on the input and feedback of a large spectrum of what we call lived experiences based on race, ethnicity, on age, on socioeconomic status, ability, education level. How do we get groups that are diverse together to talk about what it is that we need to do to further our collective work? So really there's a cycle that we started seeing around participatory decision making, which isn't just sharing some applications and asking other people what they think of it, but to actually really focus on context setting, to allow people to approach us, whoever is interested, to find their way to our system. And then especially to really give those people the tools to make decisions as well, to understand what kind of trends are happening, what is innovative, what is happening, to share that kind of information as, again, the context for making decisions. So for us specifically, that has really led to the top left, open calls. So we now have a system where anybody that's interested in participating can sign up online and join us. The only thing we require is for people to look at our guiding values and say they're willing to uphold those values throughout the process. And I'll get into those values in a second. Catalyst conversations are convenings where we're bringing together both environmental organizers and social justice organizers in a space where we really want to have people overlap and share what's emerging, what new ideas are happening, so that we better can get to what are called trend reports at the bottom right. So how do we create documents, and how do we kind of analyze the needs that are out there in communities, and how do we communicate those as people start making decisions about resource allocations? So that people don't come in cold, they don't understand or see what's happening in energy or new economy, or in this case, food systems. They have more background and a better understanding of what's going on in the region as they really look at these micro projects and try to make some decisions for resource allocations. All that leads into what we call our two-tiered grant review, and I'll explain that in a second as well. And that's an iterative cycle. That grant review, again, Noelle and Jamie already touched on this, but the report that happens throughout that process that really influences some of our trend reports as well. How do we constantly learn? How do we make the process of applying, the process of reviewing something that really feeds a system of ongoing learning, change, and inviting people in? So why participatory process? First and foremost, I think for us, it really led to greater accountability and transparency. We have a few minimum eligibility guidelines that are somewhat hard and fast. There's some flexibility here as well. We are looking for grassroots groups, as I mentioned, often unincorporated, that have at least 3 core members, no more than 2 full-time staff, an annual operating budget of less than $100,000. That's somewhat of a flexible guideline, since if you have 2 full-time staff, you're quickly gonna butt up against that budget. And they need to be locally focused, so we don't fund statewide or multi-state efforts. Those are kind of our hard and fast guidelines. But in 2016, we also published what we call our guiding values. And those are much more open to interpretation, and especially with your lived experience, with your perspective, they can mean different things. But we wanted to be transparent about what is important to us. So just transition is to really focus on work that moves us away from an extractive economy to much more of a human-centered, almost joyous, which I think were the terms I heard earlier as well, approach that's much more resilient and sustaining. Shifting power is really what we're talking about here. How do we support work that brings in diverse perspectives, that is really focused on the building blocks? Who is at the table making decisions? Who gets to participate in our work, and how do we create protocols and processes that honor that we need to really focus on marginalized voices? How do we lower barriers to funding? That's really at the core of why we exist. How do we take away some of these traditional barriers of having to have a 501c3 or a fiscal sponsor? How do we focus a little bit more on flexibility and risk-taking? How do we not go towards the established solutions, but how do we create space for people to try new things in a supportive environment where we can learn and sort of, we like to say, fail faster. So how can we help groups try something? If it doesn't work, let's learn, and how do we share that learning with other groups as a way to really push change? And how do we get to real change versus charity? How do we understand root causes? What are projects doing to get into root causes? And then the last 2 are a little bit more process focused, but how is it community-based fundraising? How do we create and help groups create a broader set of support that's not necessarily reliant on traditional philanthropy, but can we be creative about the types of financial support we're finding? And how is processed the product? How do we really make sure that how we make decisions is as important as what is being decided? It's a core piece for us internally, and we're really trying to encourage some of our applicants to live up to this as well. And these are the guiding values that we're asking our readers to judge each application on. We do a webinar. I'll explain this a little bit later in the process as well. But this is where we really want to have the participatory process be front and center. Different people will have different interpretations of how a specific project is living up to these guiding values. And this is where the participatory process is incredibly important for us to be accountable and transparent. And as you'll later see, these headers are also ways to give feedback to applications and applicants in specific headers where folks might be able to dig a little bit deeper as different readers read through a project. Another reason why participatory process is important to us is because opportunities and challenges are just exceedingly complex. It's no longer enough for a one-shot solution or an expert or institution to work by themselves. One way we try to communicate that is by using what's called the 4 R's, which is the theory of transformation from spirit and action, which really talks about a spectrum of activity at the local level for community organizers, where some people will choose to resist, actively work against the current system, rejecting what's happening. Others will work within the current system, looking to reform it, policy work. Yet other groups will look to recreate and generate new systems, actively try to come up with new ways of doing things. And there's an ideal of reimagining as well, as what if we just disregard our current system fully and just really try to think about a system that works for everybody? What would that look like if we're not constrained by how things work right now? These are not distinct, separate things where a project will only resist or only reform, but a lot of our work requires all these 4 R's to show up at different points throughout our work. As I mentioned, a lot of our systemic issues are incredibly complex, and to realize sort of these different angles and keep that in mind as we look at solutions has been one really useful learning tool for readers and reviewers and people that are participating, to read through a concept like this, a theory like this, and then apply that to applications as they read through projects, and keep this in mind of how are these different R's showing up. And how can we help groups realize that maybe resist needs to be more incorporated, or maybe reimagine could be a piece of the work, and how do we give that feedback? A really important piece for us when we talk about equity and inclusiveness is just acknowledging that there's an increasingly diverse population, and it highlights the need that we need to draw in more voices. And working in philanthropy, that's a problem. This is a report that was published in 2017 by the Council on Foundations that did some extensive research around staff of current philanthropic institutions. And about 80% of staff in current institutions is white. So less than around 20% collectively, but definitely not proportionate to what we're seeing demographically in the country. These are the people that are making decisions, and that has an impact. Who decides matters. The fact that 80% of foundation staff self-identifies as white is something we really need to look at, and it has an impact on who receives funding. Same around gender. There's a lot more women that self-identify as female working in the philanthropic sector, but they're not necessarily at the executive level. They're not at the decision-making level. When we look again at race, ethnicity, it's predominantly people that self-identify as white that are in leadership positions. There are very few minority leaders in the foundation world right now. We need to do better. We need to really look at internal culture, why that is, and we need to figure out ways for more voices to show up in decision-making, and participatory decision-making is one way that we're focused on to make that happen. And we're not there yet. When we look at this year, which is our first year that we're really doing this open call and pushing this participatory approach, we're still about 75% of folks that are self-identifying as white. And as an organization, we've decided we're going to ask these questions on registration forms. How people are self-identifying around the range of demographic characteristics, from age to gender, to sexuality, to education level, and race, ethnicity as well. And that's a really important piece for us to actually really be able to understand what is happening, where we need to focus, and how we can improve, as well as putting, again, equity at the center to really acknowledge that this is an important piece that we have to focus on in all of our processes. A few other metrics that we're using around age, we're seeing diversity working with folks from under 25 to over 76. And socioeconomically, we're seeing folks that are self-identifying as working class and lower middle class that are really part of our reader group. So these statistics represent Our current reader, we have about 160 readers helping us read through our Grow and Young Adult Leader applications in SEED, that rapid response piece. We're still working to figure out the exact right way to get participation as we review applications. And lastly, and I think this has come up a number of times as well within the participatory process, especially when we bring in equity and bias conversations, it just provides an opportunity to practice and operationalize these values, to give people the list of values that I just gave you all, and to really talk about bias and how that shows up and privilege, to then give them 10 applications that they need to read through and apply and really disrupt their own thinking and try to think about some of the biases that are popping up as they're reading through these applications, is an incredibly powerful opportunity for folks to truly practice that equity muscle. How do we put ourselves in situations where we're really actively reflecting and in some ways slowing down the process to try to figure out what it means to have equity at the center? Doing grant making and doing it in a participatory way is a really powerful way for folks to actually really make it come alive. And part of what we do is to really focus on some of these biases and give, through webinars as well as a 2-day retreat, give opportunities for people to kind of sit with that before they start reading. So really quickly, I want to be mindful of time, but there's 6 overarching biases that we look at in decision making. You can read through them. I'll skip going into detail, but there are examples of how they show up. And this is really what we spend a lot of time in our grant making retreat, especially to kind of dig into this before we even start making decisions, is how do we really acknowledge some of these biases exist and how do we disrupt our own thinking? And then how does white supremacy culture show up? Especially in philanthropy, there's so many ways that we keep seeing that occur. The power of the written word. If it's not written down in an application, a strategic plan, it's not real. Many foundations expecting to see growth. Bigger is better. We want more of something. The sense of urgency that we're seeing around, sure, we want to slow things down, focus on process, but the sky is falling and we have to come up with solutions. Very true. I mean, we see reports all the time that are giving us a narrower and narrower window. At the same time, it's important to not lose sight of process and make sure that especially marginalized voices are heard and part of decision making. White supremacy culture also really focuses on measurable goals, which aren't always there when we focus on process. And this idea that there is objectivity, there's a right way of seeing things, there are a right way of doing things. Some lose, some win, as we saw in earlier graphics, is very much part of this dominant culture that we're trying to disrupt through participatory decision-making and bringing in a broader range of perspectives and really honoring and looking at our process. So we have 2 phases. I'll try to go fast here. We have 2 phases of this participatory process. The phase 1 is around engaging applicant readers. This is that open call where anybody that is participating anybody that wants to participate can participate. Applicants that have active applications can participate at this level in phase 1 as well. So we're asking people to sign up through a registration form that's really basic, asking their first name, last name, contact information, asking them if they've read our guiding values and if they're willing to uphold them. But that's pretty much it. We ask them to participate in 2 webinars, one that explains our system and one that talks about these trends that I talked about earlier to set the context, to give people the information they need to make decisions. And then we ask them to sign virtual confidentiality forms as well as conflict of interest forms. And then most readers get about 8 to 10 applications, and we ask them to review online, and I'll show that in a second, over a 3-week period. Once that happens, Grassroots Fund staff calls every applicant to really share some of the feedback, some of the questions that these readers raised. And that goes into phase 2, which is a grant making committee retreat where we bring together 13 to 15 of the readers, not active applicants at that point. We only invite people that don't have active applications to not have any conflict of interest in the room. And it's a 2-day retreat to, again, really create space to dig into equity, bias, and privilege ahead of making decisions. And one way to lower the barrier to participation is that we cover food and lodging, and we also offer a $500 stipend for people to participate in that retreat as a way to really make sure that everybody that wants to participate there has an opportunity. And we really pay attention to the demographics of this group to make sure this group really brings together diverse lived experiences as we make some final decisions. So we have an online system that can really do this participatory piece, very streamlined. We've built it off the shelf because we couldn't find systems that allowed us to do exactly what we want. We basically have people sign up to our website, they log in, they have easy access to the assignments that they have. They click a button after they read through an application to post their review, which is linked back to some of the overarching guiding values that I shared earlier, where they score from 1 to 5 on how well that group meets a certain value. And then we ask them to add specific comments and questions as well that we can take into account as we look at an application and start having conversations via the phone. For us as staff in that sort of 1.5 phase in between the 2 different phases, this is a really important guide. We see the average scores. So the high score is a 5. We have 8 different categories in our guiding values, the 7 guiding values plus what we call it the gut feeling that you can score on after reading. What do you come away with? So the maximum score is 40, and this average score is a really helpful tool for us to understand where an application fits. So in terms of how much time this takes to coordinate and facilitate, I would say it's also true that it kind of shifts our work as program officers away from having to spend a lot of time on the call to relying a little bit more on readers and input that we're getting there. So yes, it's more work to facilitate this process, but it's also less work during the due diligence process. So it's a little bit of a give and take there. Plus, this is a really powerful tool to start sharing with applicants as well. It's something that we're working on to actually not attribute it to specific readers, but how do we share these average scores back out when we say a group of peers of about 10 people read through your application, and this is where they're scoring your specific project or idea a little bit lower. And how does that then connect to some of the trainings and workshops that we're offering that can really help groups dig deeper on those areas where their peers are saying more work could be done? The retreat itself, again, I'm trying to be mindful of time, so it might feel like I'm flying through this, but happy to answer any questions. The 2-day retreat, again, really creates that space to dig into equity and bias, to create trust among each other, to talk about the decision-making process, our guidelines, to really assess some of the work that's happening there, until we dig into day 2, which is when we make decisions or recommendations to our board for final approval, and really get some feedback on the review process as well. So ultimately, and again, this is consistent with what Noelle and Jamie have said as well, a lot of this is about people, about relationship building, about allowing space to really connect, to hear from different perspectives, to challenge ourselves, to acknowledge bias, to have an opportunity to practice disrupting some of those biases, and to really, in the end, create stronger ambassadors for us as an organization and for our grant programs. And that has been a really powerful way to get a much more diverse pool of applicants. We are really seeing the impact of social justice organizations that are not identifying themselves as environmental organizers or food organizers to start applying for funding to do work that does have food justice implications. So how do we make this a movement that is not just the traditional environmental organizer, but something that really addresses and acknowledges the intersectionality of the challenges and the issues that we're seeing out there? The fact that people are reading, are participating, are seeing how this process works means they are reaching out to those groups in their own community that are doing this kind of work and truly encouraging them to apply and participate.
And Bart, there are some clarifying questions coming in.
Yeah, I'm just trying to eye the chat, but.
Folks are, yeah, that's tough to do when you're presenting. So folks are interested in kind of what's the range of typical grant amounts, and who are the readers, and do the readers know those grant amounts?
Yes, yeah, so the readers through this open call, it's really anybody interested. So anybody on this call that wants to join us as a reader is very welcome to do so. We do ask those demographic characteristic questions where there's an option to say wish not to disclose. But we really try to kind of have a picture of who the readers are in general, but anybody can participate as long as they're willing to say they're upholding our values. And then we do specifically share information on each grant program. So the seed grants are up to $1,000, the grow grants are up to $3,500, and our young adult leader grants are up to $7,500. And depending on how groups score, that average score, that impacts whether or not a group is fully funded or partially funded. And we really cover that on webinars with readers as we prepare them to start reading specific applications.
Thanks. And if you have any final thoughts for your presentation, we can invite Noelle and Jamie on for some final Q&A.
Yeah, let me just sort of share to wrap up that really a lot of folks are just incredibly grateful for the opportunity to get to practice the equity, how to operationalize values, to really see the work in a much more systemic perspective, and just have an opportunity to get into practicing as well as learning about how equity is truly operationalized at the local level. And then some of our learning edges for ourselves is how do we really prioritize outreach to communities of color, low-income communities? How do we use our reporting process as input for this iterative process? And then we're exploring with Food Solutions New England, how can something like a participatory grant-making process really help all of the network members dig deeper around equity and really look at what's happening at the local level as a way to look at innovation and growing edges. And then lastly, as I said, we invite everybody to sign up and join as a reader. You can go to grassrootsfund.org/participate and share your interest in joining us on this journey.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. A question from Sue DeLandon on our steering team. How do you keep folks interested and involved and, reach new audiences?
Yeah, for us, it's been most people reading through the application often had no idea what grassroots groups are doing and are often very overwhelmed, or in a positive way, of how sort of systemic folks are thinking at the local level, thinking about their Foodshed and the work that they are doing and the impact that it's having. So we give people about 8 to 10 applications and a 3-week period to read through those applications, which has felt really doable for folks. They can do it whenever they want since it's an online system. Which is huge for folks that have full-time jobs or kids or both. And most people are just automatically telling us that they want to come back and read more because it's, especially in our current climate, it's sort of a place where they feel hopeful and where they are seeing innovation and change happening. So it's been sort of an easy way to get people to come back because it's such a positive experience for them.
Awesome. Noelle and Jamie, I see you all have been chatting away in the chat box. Do you have any final thoughts here as we wrap up?
I would just say, to add on to the question that Bart was answering, is that we always try to make everything that we do fun and engaging, and we're always willing to have those authentic one-on-one conversations with people. And so what really attracts people to the work is the love and joy that they feel while they're doing the work. And then also I just wanted to say that this can seem really overwhelming as a concept when you get, hammered over the head with all these different ideas, but I want people to think about one way that they can start incorporating this immediately. Something that's really influenced our work, or put it in the chat, is Curtis Ogden, who I know is a consultant of the Chesapeake Foodshed Network. He has a Thinking Like a Network resource, and we've used that as a conversation piece. We've also used the document shared by Bart about white supremacy culture as a conversation piece to start getting these juices flowing about working in new ways. And so that's something that can be done tomorrow.
Fabulous. Thank you. Noelle, any closing thoughts?
No, this is wonderful. Thank you, Bart. Great presentation. Thanks to the organizers and especially to everyone who came today. And don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have follow-up questions.
And yeah, thank you to all three of you. Bart, thank you. I just want to share our final slide here. Can you guys see this? Hopefully you can. So thanks everybody. We really appreciate your time. Folks on the call, there'll be a survey in your inbox shortly. Please just take a few minutes to fill it out. We really rely on your feedback to improve programming and to inform the content of our programming. And if you do, you'll be entered in a drawing to win CFN steering team member Renee Brooks Katakalos's new book, The Chesapeake Table, Your Guide to Eating Local. We're so excited. It's just coming out now. If you have any questions, please send them to us at our info@ email right here. And we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar next week, along with all these wonderful resources that this panel gave us today and the slides. Thank you for your interest and for joining us. And again, thank you so much to the presenters for sharing your experience and expertise. And have a great afternoon, everybody.